An ancient high-level route runs from Ochalater Farm in Glen Cluny, just south of Braemar, over the hills known as the Mouth, down through Glen Doll to the head of Glen Clover. It's very popular with walkers and it's known as Jock's Road. It's named after a certain John or Jock Winters who took sides in a landowning dispute several centuries ago between Lord Aberdeen and Lord Invercald. Now, strictly speaking, the name Jock's Road should really only apply to the summit section and that part that runs down through Glen Doll to the head of Glen Clover, but most people just take it to mean the entire stretch from Glen Cluny here to the head of Glen Clover. Now, Jock's Road has a great deal to offer the walker. It's fairly demanding. It's about 13 miles in length, that's 21 kilometres. It has attractive scenery. It's got a wilderness feel to it, and it's certainly steeped in history. But unfortunately, Jock's Road has had more than its fair share of tragedy, and we hope to say more about that at various points along the route. Let's take a wee look at this information cairn. The East Grampian Deer Management Group. I like to see that in a notice because it means that hill walkers are welcome. In fact, in many of the notices in the Deeside area at the start of various walks, it says just that, hill walkers welcome. But this isn't always the case in other parts of Scotland because increasingly walkers are faced with notices like this. Warning, high velocity rifles may be used on this land at any time. Or how about this one? Private, no hill walking. Very intimidating, I have to say. But today we need have no feelings of intimidation because we're walking in two estates, Invercald Estate and Airlie Estate, and both of these estates have an enlightened attitude with regards to access. But of course that actually brings with it some responsibilities on the part of the walker. For example, to keep to what they call preferred routes during the deer stalking season, and not to light fires, not to drop litter. In other words, generally keep to the country code. Now, the forecast for today is quite promising, so let's head off. Yes, I know it doesn't have much of a wilderness feel just now with this well-constructed Landover track and some of the traffic down there, but it will, this track will peter out eventually, believe me, have faith. Well, thank goodness for that bridge there. Didn't fancy trying to ford that stream, or river, I think I should say. This is actually the Calater Burn. But it's always a good thing in a walk to stop at some point and look back and just take a look at the way you've come. And back there we get our first glimpse of the Cairngorm Mountains. These are the highest in the British Isles, some of the summits over 4,000 feet. I don't know what that is in metres, but it's certainly over 4,000 feet. And the one that you can see there, the specific one you can see there, is actually Ben Ann. It has these characteristic knobs on top, like great warts on its summit plateau. These are rock outcrops and they're actually granite tors. Now, another feature of interest which is in connection with this area, it's a local story to do with a priest called Patrick. Now, according to the Ordnance Survey map, once again, the hill that you see up there is in fact Craig Fadrig. Now the true summit is in fact hidden behind that, and it's much higher. And it was named after a local Braemar priest, Patrick. And apparently several centuries ago there was a very bad winter and the ground was frozen well into the end of May. So the Reverend Patrick collected his congregation from Braemar. They walked up Glen Calater as far as Loch Calater, where apparently there's a holy well or a priest's well. And there he led his congregation in prayer, trying to bring an end to this long winter. And after a few minutes, believe it or not, the ice in the well began to melt. And a few minutes later, dark rain clouds began to appear on the summit of a hill nearby, and the thaw was well and truly underway. Now, in order to show their gratitude, the local population named two hills after the Reverend Patrick. This one here, Craig Fadrig, and the one where the rain clouds appeared, they called that the Big Hill of the Priest, in Gaelic, Carn and Tagerst Moor. And not far away there's a smaller hill, Carn and Tagerst Bake. But anyway, there you are, Craig Fadrig. Well, here we are at Loch Calater Lodge. That's taken us quite a wee bit of time to walk that bit. I won't say how long it took us, but anyway. Loch Calater Lodge is actually something of a bit of a complex. There's three buildings within this complex. There's the lodge itself, probably dates back to Victorian times, I would imagine. There's what used to be the stables for stabling the ponies. The ponies were used to bring deer carcasses down off the hill. And another wooden structure, which to me, for all the world, looks like a deer carcass house. I'm not certain about that, but that's what it looks like to me. Now, the stables is actually a hill walker's bothy now, and it's maintained by the Mountain Bothy Association. But I have to admit, I'm just a little bit apprehensive about being here, because this bothy and the lodge have a reputation for being haunted. Okay, I think I'll have a wee look inside the bothy here, noted as the stables. Now, as far as I know, there are no poltergeists associated with the bothy, only the lodge. I'll cut it out. Anyway, just in case. Oh, quite palatial. Certainly much more attractive than any other bothies I've seen. And the visitor's book here. Should I sign it, I wonder? Ah, why not? Why not? Will I mark in the members of the film crew? Nah. Oh, well, okay then, okay. I think I'll just hang on to this for a bit. I'm feeling a bit nervous at the moment being in here. I know it's not supposed to be haunted, but I just don't know. Ah, a couple of armchairs here. Very comfortable indeed, but who brought them here? Were they dragged up, brought up in a Land Rover? I suppose so. Oh, better keep this upright in case my luck runs out. Supposed to keep this upright. A few sleeping bags could go down there, I suppose. Yeah. Right, we've left Loch Calliter Lodge behind and we're now walking along the shores of Loch Calliter itself. Now, one of the interesting things, I remember I mentioned to you at the beginning that there's been a few tragedies associated with Jock's Road and the general area of Jock's Road. And one such tragedy happened just about 40 years ago when a Canberra bomber crashed on a hill up in that direction there, Carn and Taggersmoor. And the hillside is strewn with pieces of aircraft, still there to this day. The Canberra bomber that crashed 40 years ago apparently contained 4 crew members, and of course they were all killed. So that's one of the tragedies to occur in relation to Jock's Road. The next part of the walk involves going along beside the shores of Loch Calliter here, heading towards the hill that you can see lit up by the sun. That's Tolmont, and Tolmont is a Munro being a mountain in Scotland over 3,000 feet or 914.4 metres. We have in fact to walk up a steep corrie back wall. It's called Corrie Breck, and although it's not marked on the map, apparently that is the name, Corrie Breck. There's nothing very difficult about it, it's all quite grassy, but it is fairly steep. So that's the next bit. Well, we've come to the end of Loch Calliter and we're now going to be heading off, continuing in this direction, over land which I think is going to be quite marshy because this is a former loch floor. But what I want to draw your attention to is the hill up here, this very craggy hill. And according to the map, it is Craig na Hir Hadju, which apparently in Gaelic means the crag of the arrowmen. But why arrowmen? Why not bowmen? I mean, did they leave their bows behind or what? Throwing arrowheads at their baffled pursuers? Of course, it could be that it's got nothing to do whatsoever with arrowmen. It may be, in fact, to do with the shape of some of the rocks up there. And although perhaps you can't see it from here, near the summit there are rocks with a pointy shape, a bit like arrowheads. So that might, in fact, be the origin of the name. That's a possibility. Okay, the next section of the walk, in that direction there, heading over this flat, rather boggy land. Hope it's not too boggy, but here goes. Oh, hiya. What am I doing sitting here reading the Angry Corrie? Well, I think I'm due a bit of a rest. The Angry Corrie, incidentally, is a hill walker's fanzine of all things. And I suppose the name is actually quite appropriate because we're going to look at a feature behind us here, a glacial feature called a corrie. And I want to try and give a wee bit of explanation as to how that feature was formed. After all, it's meant to be an educational video. Now, the word corrie is from the Gaelic curra, which means, I believe, a kettle. Although I think in some dialects, for example in Lewis, they would say cudda. Now, the way this feature was formed, there's actually 3 distinct processes. One process is called glacial scouring, and that's where pieces of rock debris embedded in the bottom of the glacier scrape away the bottom of the corrie and over deepen it. Another process is called glacial plucking, and that's where the ice melts slightly and water gets into cracks in the corrie back wall. And when the glacier refreezes and the ice begins to move away, it plucks big chunks of rock away from the quarry back wall and the sides too, and in that way over deepening the feature. One other process is where the glacial performs a rotational action so that it scours more strongly on the quarry floor, and then the ice begins to rise up slightly at the entrance to the quarry and begins to slide down into this ground here. So the result is that the entrance to the quarry, or the lip or threshold, is at a slightly higher level than the floor of the quarry itself. Incidentally, I almost forgot to tell you, the name of that quarry is Quarry Candor. At various locations in Glen Doll, large tree stumps with complex root systems can be seen half buried in the peat. This is evidence of an ancient forest. The forest flourished at some period after the last ice age, but went into decline when the climate changed. The climate in fact became warmer and wetter. This event occurred during what is known as the Atlantic period, about 7,000 to 10,000 years ago. The moisture and the warmth encouraged the growth of moss and peat, which virtually killed off the forest. This is the start of a fairly steep ascent up a grassy quarry back wall. This is in fact Quarry Breck, which means the speckled quarry. And this will take us up onto the plateau where I would imagine the wind will be a bit stronger. Now today with the sun shining, all looks very benign and pleasant. But on the 1st of January 1959, during a howling gale and a blizzard, 5 men of the Universal Hiking Club struggled up here. They managed to gain the plateau and were hit with the full force of the worst blizzard to hit the UK in living memory. Unfortunately, all 5 men perished. Today, however, things are much different, and we're now going to, obviously, make our way up Quarry Breck. Oh, that was good. Now we're almost at the top of Quarry Breck, and it'll lead us onto the plateau surface, and it's actually at this point earlier in the year where I saw, believe it or not, a mountain hare, and it had its white winter coat on, and I managed to get a film shot of it. So here it is now. Jock's Road has an abundance of wildlife if you keep your eyes open. As we approach the summit section at around 3,000 feet, wind speed increases and there is a noticeable drop in temperature. This is the summit section of Jock's Road, and it's at this point where an awful lot of people have gone wrong in the past and become disoriented, especially in mist and cloud. So that, I mean, using the compass is absolutely essential for this particular walk. In fact, it was in 1st of January 1959 that the 5 men walking Jock's Road went off the road and headed up towards Tolmont, a mountain which is away to my right here, and the outcome was of course tragic. All 5 perished. There was another case in 1956 when a Newcastle University student, Malcolm Bruce, got lost at this section up here, and many weeks later a stalker was out walking when they saw some crows, he saw some crows rather, working on something on top of a crag. When he went to investigate, it was the body of the poor, unfortunate Malcolm Bruce. There was one other case in 1976 where a couple died in similar circumstances. Now, what we have to do now is head on towards the summit of Jock's Road, which is a point called Crow Craigies, and that's where we're heading now. Well, here we are at the highest bit of Jock's Road. It's a point called Crow Craigies, and it's at 920 metres. Now, Crow Craigies is just one of many significant summits on a great plateau which is known as the Mount. And the Mount stretches from Dramochter over in the west all the way to the cliffs of Loch Nagar in the east. The word Mount is actually a corruption of the Gaelic word Monagh, which means a high plateau. In fact, an old name for the Cairngorm Mountains was Monagh Ruag, which means the red high plateau. And the colour red is actually from the distinctive reddish or pinkish granite. And one of the minerals in that granite is a pink colour. It's called orthoclase feldspar. So I hope you're paying attention. I'll be asking questions about this later on. Orthoclase feldspar. Anyway, let's have a look at some of these significant summits. The first summit of any great significance is Broadcairn, over there towards the northeast. It's over 3,000 feet, and that's considerably over 914.4 metres, and it's therefore classified as a Munro. It's one greatly prized by Munro baggers. Over towards the north by northeast, the small rocky summit that you can see there is Cairn Banach, yet another Munro. And to the right of it, that great massive lump to the right and further away, is one we've mentioned before, Carn and Taggart Moor, the big hill of the priest. Moving further round still, and this time heading towards the west, is a hill we've come across many times before as we approach Glen Calater. That's Tolmount. And the word tall is from the Gaelic Tull, which means hollow, the hollow mountain. Now, admittedly, it doesn't look very hollow from here, but the other side is very deeply bitten into by glacial action about, say, 18 to 20,000 years ago. Well, from the summit of Crow Craigies, it's downhill all the way. A bit like this video, really.
Shamu
that's us off the summit plateau, so it's a bit milder, although I must say the wind's getting up a wee bit. Anyway, this is going to be the historical part of the video, so you really will need to pay attention because I'll be hitting you with 4 learning outcomes, all mass, all together in the one assessment. Anyway, Jock's Road was actually part of a network of drove roads, cattle drove roads. And these drove roads ran from, especially the Jock's Road one anyway, ran from Deeside all the way down towards the cattle markets or trysts at Crieff. Now Crieff is a town in Perthshire and it came to some dominance during the cattle droving days, although later on it went into decline and Falkirk became much more important because it was perhaps more suited to English cattle buyers coming up from the south. But droving reached its peak round about the 1830s, and then sometime after that went into decline with the coming of the railways and the steamships. But when it was at its peak, lines of cattle up to 10 miles long was quite a common sight, especially when drove roads converged. Of course, in earlier times, when times were a bit more unsettled, it was quite a common thing to see cattle being driven in the opposite direction from the lowlands up into Deeside. And these were cattle that were actually stolen as a result of cattle raids. And the cattle were secreted in the various glens round about Deeside. Now, the Gaelic word for a cattle raid was spray. And that's a word that's been handed down to us in English as spree, as for example going on a spree. And the reason for that is that cattle raids were fairly high-spirited affairs. In fact, cattle thieving was not a thing to be ashamed of. In fact, they were quite proud of their activity. It was a rather macho thing to do, cattle raiding. Oh yes, there was one other historical bit. If you didn't fancy droving, or you weren't too keen on cattle thieving, well, there was always cattle extortion. And what happened here was the cattle drover would give up so many cattle in return for protection, in return for safe passage. Now, the payment of this cattle was given the word mail, and since the cattle were black, the term blackmail was coined. Right, we're now going to head on down towards the head of Glen Doll, where we'll pass a couple of other things worthy of note. At the beginning of the film, we said something about the origin of Jock's Road. This might be the time to say just a wee bit more about this. As we said, Jock's Road was named after a certain John or Jock Winter, and he took the side of Lord Invercald in a land-owning dispute between Lord Invercald and Lord Aberdeen. Apparently there was one occasion where Jock and his cronies were walking along this drove road when they met, of all people, Lord Aberdeen. So they promptly stopped him and turned him back. Well, of course, Lord Aberdeen, he was absolutely furious. In fact, he was livid. And he was determined to find out the name of the ringleader. So our friend Jock Winter decided that it was prudent to hide up in the hills here. So for quite some time, he skulked about up here and lived, in fact, in a hut, a shepherd's hut, which came to be known as Jock's Hut. Ultimately, of course, Jock's Hut collapsed, but it actually survived into, as far as I know, about 1960. So that's the origin of the name Jock's Road. Now, we're quite close now to the head of Glen Doll, and all we have to do now is to walk along the track here for a few yards and we'll come to a commemoration plaque, and I would like to say something about that. This is a plaque, a commemoration plaque put up by the Universal Hiking Club of Glasgow to commemorate the 5 men who perished in a blizzard on Jock's Road on the 1st of January 1959. The men were Frank Daly, Robert McFaul, Joseph Devlin, Harry Duffin and James Boyle. Now, two of the men actually got as far as this point before they finally succumbed to the blizzard. They were within a couple of 100 yards of Jock's hut, but I don't think it would have made much difference to their survival. One of the men, Robert McFaul, was a college lecturer at Coatbridge College. He worked in the engineering department. Now, a man who played a leading part in the search for the five men was a certain Davy Glen. And Davy Glen decided to build a refuge to replace Jock's hut, and it became known as Davy's Burach. And Davy's Burach is just a few yards from this plaque, so let's have a look at that now. Okay, here we are at Davy's Burach. I'm just going to go inside and have a wee bit of a nosy around, and also to check it out for acoustics. The final section of the route leads us down through beautiful Glen Doll, hemmed in on all sides by steep rocky crags. Although not particularly long as wilderness walks go, Jock's Road should not be treated lightly. Competency in map work and compass reading are vital, especially if the weather turns nasty. Remember, the summit section is almost trackless. We have been lucky with the weather today, but it has to be kept in mind that this route has claimed many lives.
Shall